Eliza Ashworth Vance thought the glossy cover of Forbes magazine was a mistake, a cruel prank orchestrated by the universe specifically to ruin her Sauvignon Blanc buzz. For 2 years, she had cultivated a narrative of serene pity for her ex-husband, Liam. He was the brilliant but unambitious architect she had graciously set free, a man destined to design tasteful suburban extensions while she continued her ascent in the social stratosphere. The story was neat, clean, and most importantly, flattering to her. But the man on the cover was not designing extensions. He was staring out from the heavy paper stock with an expression she had never seen on him before, not of arrogance, but of profound, unshakable certainty. His name was printed in a bold, authoritative font above the headline, "The Silent Architect: How Liam Vance Built a New Skyline from the Ashes." Ashes? Her mind recoiled. Whose ashes? He hadn't been in a fire. He'd been laid off. It was a simple, mundane, corporate restructuring. It was the event that had prompted her to throw the most talked-about party of the season, Liam's Freedom Fiesta. The memory of that party, once a source of smug satisfaction, now curdled in her stomach. She saw it all with horrifying clarity, the patronizing toasts, the pitying looks from her friends, her father's booming, condescending advice. And through it all, Liam, standing quietly in the center of their cavernous living room, his expression as placid as a lake, holding a simple, leather-bound journal in one hand. He had seemed so small then, diminished. Now his image was 3 feet away on a coffee table, a titan of industry staring back at her. Her world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of status and appearance, had just been leveled by a magazine. Within seconds, the life she thought she had won would be revealed as the consolation prize. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your dreams dismissed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, then you are going to understand the justice in this story. It's a reminder that true strength isn't loud, it's patient. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to go back 2 years to the night it all began. And hey, drop a comment and let me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's return to that fateful party where the seeds of a spectacular downfall were being sown with champagne and ridicule. The day Liam lost his job was, ironically, beautiful. Sunlight, crisp and golden, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their minimalist home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Liam had walked in, placed his briefcase by the door with a quiet finality, and looked at Eliza. His face was calm, but the lines around his eyes were tight. "They're downsizing," he said, his voice even. "My whole department is gone, effective immediately." Eliza had performed the role of the supportive wife flawlessly. She rushed to him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders, her cheek pressed against his. She murmured all the right things. "Oh, my darling, I'm so sorry. It's their loss, truly. You're too talented for them anyway." But beneath the practiced sympathy, a spark of something else ignited. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was opportunity. For months, she had felt weighed down by his quiet, steady ambition, which felt so pedestrian compared to her family's explosive, headline-grabbing success. Her father, Richard Ashworth, was a real estate magnate who moved buildings like chess pieces. Her brother, Marcus, was a piranha in a bespoke suit, closing deals that earned him magazine mentions, though never the cover of Forbes. Liam, by contrast, was an artist. He spoke of structural integrity, of the way a building should serve the community, of light and space. Eliza had found it romantic at first, but romance didn't pay for couture or fun trips to Monaco. His stable, respectable salary felt like an anchor when she wanted to be a yacht. His dismissal wasn't a tragedy, it was a release. "You know what?" she'd said, pulling back, her eyes shining with a sudden, brilliant idea. "We shouldn't mope. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning. A chance for you to finally be free from that corporate grind. We should celebrate." Liam had looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Celebrate?" "Yes, a freedom fiesta. We'll invite everyone, our friends, my family. We'll show them this isn't a setback, it's a launch pad." He had been silent for a long moment, his gaze searching hers. She thought he was processing the shock, the grief. In reality, he was cataloging the moment. He was watching the glint of excitement in her eyes, the barely concealed triumph in the curve of her smile. He was seeing with perfect, cold clarity that his wife was not his partner. She was his audience, and he had just failed to perform. "If that's what you want, Eliza," he said, his voice betraying nothing. And it was what she wanted. It was exactly what she wanted. The party was her stage, and Liam's misfortune was her spotlight. It would reinforce her narrative, that she was the dynamic, powerful one in the relationship, forever saddled with a man who just couldn't keep up. The party wasn't for him. It was about him, and that distinction would make all the difference. As she began tapping names into her phone, composing a group text announcing the impromptu celebration, Liam had walked into his study. He closed the door softly behind him, leaving her to her gleeful preparations. Inside, he opened his simple, leather-bound journal, the one he would carry with him all night, and drew a single, thick line under the last entry. Then, on a fresh page, he wrote 2 words: Phase 2. The party was in full swing by 8 o'clock. The house, usually a sterile monument to modern design, pulsed with the chatter of Eliza's social circle. Waiters in crisp, white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of condescension. Liam stood near the sprawling window overlooking the city, a glass of water in his hand. He hadn't touched the champagne. He needed his mind sharp tonight. This wasn't a party, it was a reconnaissance mission. He was gathering data. Eliza was a whirlwind of social grace, flitting from group to group, her laughter tinkling like ice in a crystal glass. "Isn't it for the best?" she'd say, a hand on a friend's arm. He was so stressed. Now he can finally breathe. Maybe take up a hobby, pottery perhaps? Liam watched her, a strange sense of detachment settling over him. It was like observing a play where he was the main character, but he hadn't been given the script. He could see the narrative she was weaving, thread by shimmering, deceitful thread. He was the pitiable husband, the fallen man, and she was the brave, supportive wife, making the best of a terrible situation. His father-in-law, Richard Ashworth, found him by the window. Richard was a large man, built like the concrete pillars of the skyscrapers he developed. He exuded an aura of expensive cologne and absolute certainty. He clapped a heavy hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look like camaraderie, but felt like an assertion of dominance. "Liam, my boy, tough break," he boomed, his voice loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. "But hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles in the big leagues. Not everyone's cut out for it. No shame in that." Liam met his gaze. "Thank you for your concern, Richard." "Concern? Of course. Your family," Richard said, taking a hearty gulp of scotch. "Now you listen to me. This is a chance to recalibrate. Think smaller, more manageable. You always had a good eye for aesthetics. Friend of mine's wife is looking for someone to design her garden shed. A high-end shed, of course. Climate-controlled. Could be a nice little project to get you back on your feet." He winked, as if sharing a generous secret. The insult was so perfectly delivered, wrapped in a veneer of avuncular advice, that it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. A garden shed. From designing 20-story commercial buildings to a shelter for lawnmowers. Liam felt a cold stillness spread through his chest. He didn't get angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What he felt was colder, sharper. It was focus. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll keep that in mind, Richard, thank you." Richard, satisfied that he had dispensed his patriarchal wisdom and firmly established the new pecking order, clapped his shoulder again and moved off to hold court elsewhere. Liam watched him go. Then his eyes drifted to the leather journal he held, its worn cover smooth beneath his thumb. Inside that journal were not designs for sheds, but schematics for a revolutionary new type of modular construction, sketches for a sustainable urban development project, and a business plan so detailed and ambitious it would make Richard Ashworth's empire look like a child's Lego set. He had been working on it for 5 years, in secret, waiting for the right moment, the right funding, the right catalyst. His layoff wasn't a setback, it was the starting gun. His brother-in-law, Marcus, slithered up to him next. Marcus was the opposite of his father, lean, sharp, and predatory, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He held a flute of champagne like a weapon. "Liam," he said, his tone oozing a greasy sympathy. "Heard the news. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. I always told Eliza your firm was a sinking ship. No vision." "They had their strengths," Liam replied, his voice neutral. "Did they?" Marcus smirked. "Well, look, I've been thinking. I'm heading up a new acquisitions team at my company. It's junior-level stuff, mostly fetching coffee and running spreadsheets, but it's a foot in the door of a real player. I could probably pull some strings, get you an interview. The pay is terrible, but hey, a paycheck's a paycheck, right?" The offer hung in the air between them, shimmering with malice. It was an offer of subjugation. "Come work for me," it said. "Come be my subordinate. Let me remind you of your failure every single day." Liam looked at Marcus, at his perfectly tailored suit, and his smug, confident face. He thought of the phone call he'd had that afternoon, just an hour after he'd been let go. It was with David Chen, his old mentor and now a silent partner in his new, yet-to-be-announced venture. David had secured the final round of funding. They had over $100 million in capital, waiting to be deployed. He allowed a small, tired smile to touch his lips. "That's very generous of you to think of me, Marcus. I'll need some time to weigh my options." "Don't take too long," Marcus said with a dismissive wave. "Opportunities like this don't wait around for the unemployed." He glided back into the party, leaving Liam alone with the city lights and the weight of the secrets locked inside his journal. The humiliation was a fuel, burning clean and white-hot, forging his resolve into something unbreakable. He was not the man they thought he was, and soon, very soon, the whole world would know it. The evening wore on, a slow-motion parade of veiled insults and condescending kindness. Each conversation was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but collectively designed to make him bleed out his dignity. Eliza, radiant and oblivious, orchestrated the entire affair. She brought people over to him with a flourish. "You must say hello to poor Liam. We're all being so brave." Her performance was masterful. She was the tragic heroine, bound by love and duty to her fallen husband. The centerpiece of the humiliation arrived just after 10. Eliza clinked a spoon against her champagne glass, calling for everyone's attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to her. She stood beside Liam, slipping her arm through his, her grip surprisingly tight. "I just want to thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice imbued with a carefully modulated sincerity. "As many of you know, Liam is embarking on a new, exciting chapter in his life. The corporate world has let him go, but we, his friends, his family, never will." A murmur of sympathetic approval rippled through the crowd. Liam stood perfectly still, a statue in the eye of the storm. He could feel the pressure of her fingers on his bicep. "This isn't a time for sadness," she continued, her voice rising with theatrical emotion. "It's a time for freedom. Freedom from deadlines, from demanding clients, from the pressure to always be climbing. Now he can finally discover what he truly wants to be." She squeezed his arm. "So I'd like to propose a toast. To Liam, may his future be filled with simple joys. To Liam, the crowd executed, raising their glasses. The phrase simple joys hung in the air, a coded message everyone understood. It meant a smaller life, a less important life. It was a public demotion delivered with a smile. As they drank, Liam's mind wasn't in the room. It was miles away and months ago in a quiet cafe downtown. He was sitting across from David Chen, the man who had first seen the spark of genius in him when he was just an intern. David was in his late 60s, with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a reputation for being able to see 10 years into the future of the market. He had retired from the board of the world's largest architectural firm, bored with their lack of innovation. "They don't see it, Liam," David had said, stirring his tea. "They're all building the same glass boxes, competing on square footage. They've forgotten that buildings are for people. They've forgotten about community, sustainability, legacy. Your ideas, they're not just profitable, they're important." Liam had shown him the journal. He'd flipped through pages of designs that integrated green space into high-rises, plans for modular, affordable housing that could be erected in weeks, not years, and a master plan for revitalizing a derelict industrial district that everyone else had written off. David had closed the journal slowly, his eyes bright with excitement. "This is not a project, Liam. This is a paradigm shift. When you're ready to leave that fossil farm you work for, you call me. I'll handle the money. You just handle the vision." The memory was a shield, deflecting the petty cruelties of the party. While Eliza and her guests were toasting to his simple joys, Liam was mentally reviewing the final wireframes for the new company's website. While Richard was telling a story about a little guy who failed, Liam was recalling the exact wording of the non-disclosure agreement his first major client had signed. Eliza nudged him, pulling him from his thoughts. "Say something, darling," she whispered, her smile tight. "Thank them." He turned his head slightly, his eyes sweeping over the crowd of smiling faces. He saw pity, smugness, and a chilling indifference. These people weren't his friends. They were Eliza's court, and he was the jester. He raised his glass of water. "Thank you, Eliza, and thank you all," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the low chatter. "I appreciate the sentiment. It's true that when one door closes, another opens. You have to be ready to walk through it. I promise you all, I plan on building something memorable." His choice of words was deliberate. Building. It was a subtle reminder of who he was, but they didn't hear it. They only heard the quiet, defeated man they expected to hear. They nodded politely, their attention already drifting towards the bar, the conversation, the next piece of gossip. They had categorized him, filed him away under failure, and moved on. The dismissal was absolute. But Liam had seen something in their eyes as he spoke, a flicker of confusion. His lack of devastation was unsettling to them. He wasn't playing his part correctly. A victim was supposed to act like one. He was supposed to be distraught, or at least humbled. His placid dignity was a quiet act of rebellion, and it made them vaguely uncomfortable. They didn't know why, but they sensed, on some primal level, that they had misjudged the man standing before them. It was a fleeting thought, quickly washed away by another glass of champagne, but Liam saw it, and it was enough. The party finally wound down after midnight. The last of the guests departed, leaving a trail of empty glasses and lingering perfume. The house was silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Eliza, flushed with wine and social success, was practically buzzing. "Well," she said, kicking off her heels, "I think that went wonderfully. Everyone was so supportive." "They were," Liam agreed, his voice flat. He was gathering empty glasses, stacking them with methodical precision. "Did you hear what Marcus offered you? An interview at his firm. Liam, that's a real lifeline. You should call him first thing in the morning." "I'll think about it," he said, not looking at her. She sighed dramatically, sinking into a white leather sofa. "Don't be proud, darling. We're not in a position for you to be proud. Dad's offer was sweet too. A garden shed. It's a bit small, of course, but it's a start. It shows he cares. Liam stopped what he was doing and finally looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, the silence stretching between them. He saw the woman he had married, but he also saw a stranger, someone so blinded by the glittering reflection of her own life that she couldn't see the person standing right in front of her. "He cares about appearances, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet but devoid of its earlier neutrality. There was a hard edge to it now. "He cares about his daughter not being married to a failure. That's what tonight was about. It wasn't a celebration, it was a public relations event. Your PR event." Eliza stiffened, her wine-fueled good mood evaporating. "That's a horrible thing to say. I was trying to help you, to put a positive spin on things." "A positive spin?" he asked, a humorless smile touching his lips. "You threw a party to announce my professional death. You invited your family to pick over the corpse and offer me scraps from their table. You toasted to my simple joys. Don't you dare pretend this was for me." She stared at him, genuinely shocked. It was the first time he had ever pushed back against the narrative she and her family had so carefully crafted for him. "You're just upset," she said, her voice turning defensive. "You're lashing out because you're scared. It's understandable." "I'm not scared, Eliza," he said, and the certainty in his voice was so absolute it silenced her. "I'm awake." He turned and walked towards his study, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her perfect party. He closed the door, and this time, he locked it. Inside, he sat at his desk, the city lights twinkling beyond the window. He opened his journal. For the next 4 hours, he didn't think about his wife, her family, or the party. He worked. He sketched. He ran calculations. He refined the logistics for Phase 2. The humiliation of the evening was a fire, but he wasn't letting it consume him. He was channeling it, using its heat to forge the future. They thought they had buried him. They had no idea they had just planted a seed. The 2 years that followed were a study in divergence. From the outside, it looked exactly as Eliza and her family had predicted. Liam moved out of the grand, minimalist house and into a small, functional apartment downtown. The divorce was swift and, on his end, uncontested. Eliza, represented by a team of her father's best lawyers, had expected a fight. Instead, Liam agreed to her terms with a quiet efficiency that they mistook for weakness. He paid the alimony she demanded on the first of every month, the money arriving without comment or delay. To her, the amount was insultingly small, a constant reminder of his diminished status. She had no idea it represented less than 1% of his monthly income. She retained the house, the friends, the life. She would occasionally tell people, with a sad little sigh, that Liam was finding himself. She heard through the grapevine that he was doing some freelance consulting, working from his apartment. It fit the narrative perfectly. The brilliant architect, unable to handle the pressure, now pottering away on small, insignificant projects. A garden shed, writ large. Her life, in contrast, was a series of glittering events. Parties at her father's estate, fundraisers for charities she supported in name only, weekend trips to Aspen and the Hamptons. She was still Eliza Ashworth Vance, a name that opened doors. Her brother Marcus was promoted to senior vice president, his smugness growing in direct proportion to his stock options. Her father's company, Ashworth Holdings, broke ground on a new luxury condo tower that was lauded as the pinnacle of soulless, expensive living. They were a dynasty, secure in their position at the top of the city's food chain. Liam was a forgotten footnote in their story of success. Meanwhile, in a nondescript office building on the other side of town, Liam was building an empire. His company, which he named Vance Design Collaborative, didn't have a flashy launch. There was no press release, no announcement party. They simply started working. Their first project was the one from his journal, the revitalization of the derelict industrial district, a project everyone, including Richard Ashworth, had deemed impossible. Liam and his small, hand-picked team of the brightest young architects and engineers he knew worked in relative obscurity. They didn't bid on the glamorous downtown projects. They focused on the forgotten corners of the city. They used their proprietary modular construction techniques to build stylish, sustainable, and affordable housing complexes. They redesigned a failing public park into a vibrant community hub. They worked with city planners to create infrastructure that was both beautiful and functional. Their work was quiet, but its impact was seismic. Property values in the areas they touched began to rise. Small businesses flourished. They were winning awards, but not the flashy ones Eliza followed. They were winning awards for urban innovation, for sustainable design, for community impact. The name Vance Design Collaborative began to be whispered with reverence in the corridors of City Hall and in the boardrooms of forward-thinking investors. But in the insulated, self-congratulatory world of the Ashworths, those whispers went unheard. They were listening to a different frequency, one that only broadcasted the sound of their own success. Liam himself had changed. The quiet patience was still there, but it was now underpinned by a deep well of confidence. He dressed in simple, well-made clothes that favored function over fashion. He had let his hair grow a little longer. The perpetual tightness around his eyes was gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose. He was a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. He didn't need external validation. His validation was in the blueprints that covered his office walls, in the tangible, positive change he was creating in the city he loved. He never spoke of Eliza or her family. He didn't need to. They were part of a past he had surgically removed. He was focused only on the future he was building, one revolutionary structure at a time. The party was for Marcus. He had been named a partner at his firm, and Eliza had insisted on a celebration at her house, the house she had once shared with Liam. It was 2 years, almost to the day, since Liam's Freedom Fiesta. The guest list was largely the same. The champagne was more expensive. The air of smug self-satisfaction was thicker than ever. Eliza moved through the crowd, a perfect hostess. She felt a deep sense of contentment. Everything was as it should be. Her family was thriving. She was free. The messy, disappointing chapter with Liam was closed. "I just can't believe he thought he could compete." Richard Ashworth was booming to a small group near the fireplace, holding his third glass of scotch. He was talking about a rival developer. "The man has no vision, no guts. You need guts in this business." "It's in the blood, Dad," Marcus said, joining them. He clapped his father on the back. "The Ashworth blood." Eliza smiled. This was her world. Predictable, powerful, and safe. It was a junior associate of Marcus's, a young man named Peterson, who was eager to impress, who brought the bomb into the room. He carried it tucked under his arm, an unread copy of the latest Forbes. "Mr. Ashworth, sir," Peterson said, approaching Marcus with a sycophantic grin. "Congratulations again on the partnership. I was just reading. Have you seen the new issue? The cover story is fascinating. It's about that new architect who's completely changing the game." Marcus, who had little interest in anything that wasn't about him, waved a dismissive hand. "Architects are a dime a dozen, Peterson. All theory, no killer instinct." "Well, this one seems different," Peterson persisted, eager to show he was on top of industry news. He laid the magazine on the marble coffee table. "They're calling him the silent architect. Apparently, he came out of nowhere 2 years ago and has just been building. Secured the new waterfront development project, the one everyone wanted." Richard Ashworth froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "The waterfront project? I was told a small, unknown firm got that. A VDC or something. My people said they were no one." "Vance Design Collaborative," Peterson supplied helpfully. "That's them. The man who runs it is a genius, apparently. Took $100 million in seed funding and has turned it into a $2 billion valuation in 24 months. Without any press, it's unheard of. Eliza felt a prickle of unease, a cold dread that had no name. Vance. The name echoed in the sudden silence that had fallen over the small group. She found herself drifting towards the coffee table, as if pulled by an invisible string. Marcus scoffed, though his voice was a little tight. Probably some tech bro from Silicon Valley who thinks he can disrupt construction. It won't last. He's local, actually, Peterson said, oblivious to the rapidly changing atmosphere. The article says he used to be a senior architect at Sterling and Wright. Sterling and Wright, the firm that had laid Liam off, the firm that had been steadily losing clients and talent for the past 2 years, its slow decline a source of private amusement for Marcus. Eliza reached the coffee table. Her hand was trembling as she reached for the magazine. She felt the heavy, glossy paper beneath her fingertips. It felt like a verdict. She turned it over, and there he was, Liam. It was him, but it wasn't. The quiet, unassuming man she had pitied and dismissed was gone. In his place was a stranger who wore his face. He stood on the balcony of a breathtaking building, a structure of sweeping glass and green terraces that seemed more grown than built. The city skyline, her father's skyline, stretched out behind him, looking suddenly old and tired in comparison. He wasn't smiling. He was looking directly at the camera, his gaze level and piercing, as if he could see right through the page, right into her living room, right into her soul. The headline screamed at her, "The Silent Architect, How Liam Vance Built a New Skyline from the Ashes." The blood drained from Eliza's face. The glass of Sauvignon Blanc slipped from her fingers, shattering on the Italian marble floor. But she didn't hear it. The only sound in her ears was the roaring of her own blood, a tidal wave of disbelief and horror. Richard snatched the magazine from the table. Marcus leaned over his shoulder. Their faces, just moments before so full of arrogant satisfaction, were now masks of slack-jawed shock. Peterson, the hapless catalyst, finally sensed the gravity of the situation. "Oh," he said softly, "is he a friend of yours?" The silence that followed was absolute. The party continued to buzz around them, but the three Ashworths and Eliza were trapped in a bubble of cold, stark reality. Richard read a line from the article aloud, his voice a strangled whisper. After leaving Sterling and Wright 2 years ago, Vance immediately launched his own firm, having secretly secured one of the largest seed funding rounds in the industry's history. His first move was to acquire the derelict Southern Industrial Zone, a parcel Ashworth Holdings publicly declared undevelopable, for a fraction of its potential value. Marcus grabbed the magazine from his father. "Let me see that." His eyes scanned the page frantically. "It can't be. It's impossible." He found another passage. Vance's visionary approach has not only been profitable, it has systematically outmaneuvered older, more established players. His firm was recently awarded the city's landmark waterfront development project, a $10 billion contract that Ashworth Holdings was considered the frontrunner for. The waterfront project, the crown jewel of the city's future, the project Richard had been boasting about securing for months. He hadn't just lost it, he had lost it to Liam. He had lost it to the man he'd advised to build garden sheds. The irony was so potent, so vicious, it was almost physically painful. Eliza felt a wave of nausea. She looked around the room, at the faces of her friends, all of them blissfully unaware. This room, this house, which had been the stage for Liam's greatest humiliation, had just become the site of hers. The shattered wine glass at her feet seemed to mock her, its fragments reflecting the fractured pieces of her carefully constructed world. Her phone began to buzz in her clutch, then Richard's phone, then Marcus's. The news was spreading. The whispers at the party were no longer about Marcus's promotion. They were about the magazine on the coffee table. People were glancing at them, their expressions shifting from envy to a delicious, schadenfreude-laced pity. "I need some air," Eliza choked out, pushing her way through the crowd, ignoring their questions. She stumbled out onto the terrace, the same terrace where Liam had stood 2 years ago, quietly enduring her family's scorn. The cool night air did nothing to calm the fire in her chest. She looked out at the city, at the familiar skyline, but she saw it differently now. She saw the old buildings, her father's buildings, as dinosaurs, and she could almost feel the presence of the new ones, Liam's buildings, rising up to replace them. She fumbled for her phone, her thumb swiping clumsily across the screen. She found his number. She hadn't called it in 2 years. She pressed the button, her heart hammering against her ribs. It rang once, twice, then it went to voicemail. Liam's voice, calm and professional, filled her ear. "You've reached Liam Vance. I'm unable to take your call right now. Please leave a message." She hung up without speaking. She tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. He wasn't just busy. He was screening her calls. He was rejecting her. The man who had once answered her every beck and call, the man she had cast aside like a worn-out coat, was now unreachable. A titan on a mountain she couldn't climb. Inside, the party was dissolving. People were making excuses, eager to leave and dissect the evening's shocking revelation. Richard Ashworth was white-faced, barking into his phone at his legal team. Marcus was pacing back and forth, his face a thunderous mask of fury and disbelief. "How?" he kept muttering. "How did he do it? How did we not see?" They didn't see because they had never truly looked. They had seen a quiet, unassuming architect, not a brilliant strategist. They had seen a failure, not a patient visionary. They had seen what they wanted to see, and their arrogance had been a blindfold. Eliza sank into a patio chair, the city lights blurring through her tears. The freedom she had celebrated 2 years ago now felt like the most profound prison. She had set Liam free, yes, free to become the man he was always meant to be, while she was left behind in the gilded cage she had built for herself. The party was over. The real consequences were just beginning. It took Eliza 3 days to get a meeting. 3 days of unanswered calls, unreturned texts, and polite but firm rejections from a secretary whose voice was as smooth and impenetrable as steel. Finally, after she'd left a desperate, rambling voicemail, she received a text. Not from Liam, but from his assistant. "Mr. Vance can see you at 4 p.m. on Thursday, 1400 Bay Street, 50th floor. 1400 Bay Street. The address was a shock in itself. It was the address of the new waterfront development. The building wasn't even supposed to be finished yet. On Thursday, Eliza stood in the lobby, feeling small and out of place. This was not a lobby like her father's, all brass and dark marble, designed to intimidate. This was a space filled with light and air, with a living wall of green plants that stretched 3 stories high. It felt alive, healthy. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was silent and swift. When the doors opened, she stepped not into a reception area, but directly into Liam's office. It was vast, occupying the entire top floor, with panoramic windows that offered a godlike view of the city. The space was minimally furnished. A large oak desk, a few comfortable chairs, and walls covered not with art, but with architectural drawings and city plans. In the center of the room was a massive, intricate model of the completed waterfront development. It was breathtaking. Liam was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. He didn't turn when she entered. "Hello, Eliza," he said, his voice calm. It was the same voice, but the acoustics were different now. It resonated with the power of the room around him. "Liam," she began, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. I saw the magazine." "I imagine you did," he said, still not turning. "Forbes has a fairly wide distribution." There was no emotion in his words. It was a simple statement of fact. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question burst out of her, a raw mix of anger and hurt. All this time, you let me believe you were struggling. He finally turned and his eyes met hers. They were clear, calm, and held no trace of malice or triumph. He looked at her with the polite detachment of a stranger. What would you have had me say, Eliza? Please don't throw that party to humiliate me, because in 2 years I'm going to be one of the most successful developers in the country. Would you have believed me? She flinched. The truth of his words was a physical blow. Of course she wouldn't have believed him. She would have laughed. You knew, she whispered. That night, at the party, you knew all of this was going to happen. I knew I was going to try, he corrected gently. I had a plan. I had a partner. I had the funding. The party, that was just confirmation that I was on the right path, that I needed to be. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. She sat, feeling like a supplicant before a king. He remained standing, a subtle but clear demarcation of the power dynamic. I don't understand, she said, shaking her head. The money, the alimony, it was nothing. You were paying me pennies. I paid you exactly what your father's lawyers demanded, he replied. They based the figure on my last salary at Sterling and Wright and my projected future earnings. Their projections, it turned out, were somewhat conservative. The quiet bomb. A simple statement that carried devastating implications. Her own father's legal team, in their arrogance, had sealed her fate, ensuring she would have no claim on the fortune he was about to build. You let us all underestimate you, she accused, her voice rising. You let my father give you advice about garden sheds. You let Marcus offer you a job fetching coffee. You stood there and let it happen. And what was the alternative? He asked, his voice still maddeningly calm. Argue? Make a scene? Reveal my entire hand just to soothe my ego? That's your family's way of doing things, Eliza, not mine. I learned a long time ago that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the city below. Your father taught me that, ironically enough. He walked over to his desk, picked up a familiar object and held it. It was the leather-bound journal. Everything was in here, he said, tapping the cover. Every plan, every design, every calculation. That night, while you were all toasting to my simple joys, I was holding the blueprint for this. He swept his hand around the room, encompassing the building, the view, the empire. This was the moral mirror. He was reflecting their behavior back at her, not with anger, but with cold, irrefutable facts. He began to list their grievances, not as accusations, but as data points in his decision-making process. Your father called my work pretty pictures and said I didn't have the guts for the real world. Your brother called my firm a sinking ship and tried to hire me as his assistant. You stood by and smiled, orchestrating the whole thing because my failure made your life more interesting. You didn't just fail to defend me, you were the prosecution. Those actions had consequences, not because I'm vengeful, but because business is about trust. And you taught me, all of you, that you couldn't be trusted. Eliza had come here expecting, she didn't know what, a fight, a chance to yell, a plea for reconciliation. But she was met with this quiet, devastating clarity. There was no argument to be had. He was simply stating the truth, and the truth was indefensible. So what now? She finally asked, her voice small. Are you going to destroy them? My father? My brother? Liam looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something that might have been pity. This isn't a movie, Eliza. I'm not a villain plotting revenge. I'm a businessman, an architect. I build things. I don't destroy them. He walked back to the window. But I won't save them from themselves either. The fallout was not swift and dramatic, but slow and methodical, like a rising tide. Richard Ashworth didn't go bankrupt overnight. Instead, his company began to bleed. Liam's firm, with its innovative, cost-effective, and aesthetically superior designs, began winning all the major contracts. Banks that had once tripped over themselves to fund Richard's projects were now cautiously backing away, preferring to invest in the future, not the past. Liam's acquisition of the industrial zone, the one Richard had mocked, turned into the city's most vibrant new neighborhood, and Liam's net worth quadrupled while Richard stagnated. Richard requested a meeting. He arrived at Liam's office not with the bluster of a magnate, but with the weary air of a defeated general. He proposed a joint venture, a partnership between Ashworth Holdings and Vance Design Collaborative. "We could own this city together, boy," he'd said, trying to reignite some of his old swagger. Liam listened patiently. When Richard was finished, he simply said, "Richard, your business model is obsolete. Your vision is limited. A partnership would be a liability for my company. I'm sorry, but the answer is no." He didn't say it to be cruel. It was his honest assessment. Richard Ashworth, the man who saw himself as a kingmaker, had been rendered irrelevant. Marcus's fate was more direct. His firm, desperate to get a piece of the waterfront development, put him in charge of securing a meeting with Liam. It was his one chance to save face. Marcus tried everything: calls, emails, even showing up at the office unannounced. He was politely but firmly rebuffed every time. Finally, Liam's assistant sent a short, final email. "Mr. Vance has reviewed your firm's portfolio and has decided to partner with a company whose values and vision for the future are more closely aligned with our own. He wishes you the best." The phrase, "values and vision," was a dagger. Marcus knew exactly what it meant. His failure to secure the deal was a public humiliation within his company. His recent promotion was rescinded, and he was sidelined, left to manage minor accounts while his rivals soared past him. He had offered Liam a junior-level job, and in return, Liam had cost him his senior-level one. The symmetry was poetic. For Eliza, the consequences were more personal. The alimony, once a trivial sum, became her sole source of income. The upkeep on the massive house was crippling. She had to sell it. The sale was finalized on a gray, rainy Tuesday. As she walked through the empty rooms, their stark white walls echoing her footsteps, she was struck by how little it had ever felt like a home. It was a stage set, and the play had been a tragedy of her own making. She moved into a small, tasteful condo her father paid for, a gift born of pity, not pride. Her friends who had orbited her when she was a star began to drift away, drawn to newer, brighter constellations of power. Her life became quiet. For the first time, she was forced to sit with herself, with no parties to plan, no gossip to share. She tried to apologize to Liam one last time. She sent him a long, heartfelt letter. She wrote about her regrets, her blindness, her foolish obsession with status. She acknowledged her cruelty and asked for his forgiveness. He responded a week later. The envelope was not from his office, but from a private address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His reply was not angry or dismissive. It was kind. "Eliza," it began, "I have read your letter. I believe your remorse is genuine, and for that I am grateful. I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I have a future to build, and I can't do it with that kind of weight. I truly hope you find peace and a joy that is not dependent on the applause of others. Be well, Liam." There was no offer of reconciliation, no hint of a second chance. It was a final, dignified closing of the book. He was releasing her, just as she had once so gleefully released him. The forgiveness was real, but so was the distance. He had moved on, and she had to learn to do the same. She realized that the greatest consequence of all was not the loss of money or status, but the loss of him. She had been married to a king and had been too blind to see his crown. Months turned into another year. The skyline of the city continued to transform. a testament to Liam's vision. His buildings were celebrated not just for their beauty, but for their humanity. They were spaces where people lived, worked, and connected. He had done what he'd promised at that long-ago party. He had built something memorable. He never remarried, but he was not alone. He was surrounded by a loyal team who shared his passion, by old friends like David Chen, and by the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. His life was not loud or flashy. It was full. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam stood on the observation deck of his flagship building, the one where his office was located. David stood beside him, both of them looking out at the sprawling metropolis below. "You know," David said, a smile in his voice, "I sometimes think about that party your ex-wife threw, the Freedom Fiesta." Liam smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "I think about it too, sometimes." "Do you ever feel vindicated?" David asked. "Triumphant?" Liam was quiet for a moment, his eyes tracing the lines of the city. He looked at the old, brutalist towers of the financial district, monuments to a bygone era of pure commerce. Then he looked at the new developments, his developments, with their green roofs, community spaces, and graceful lines that seemed to reach for the sun. "Vindicated? No," he said finally. "That would imply I was fighting their game. I was never fighting their game, David. I was building my own." He turned away from the view and looked at the new blueprints spread out on a nearby table. Plans for a new public library and art center. Triumph isn't about proving your enemies wrong. It's about proving your own vision right. They were focused on tearing things down, my confidence, my career, my worth. But a true architect, a true builder, only ever focuses on what they're creating. His journey hadn't been about revenge. It had been about integrity. It was a quiet, patient, and ultimately profound lesson. That true worth is not measured by the noise you make or the status you hold, but by the strength of your foundation and the quality of what you choose to build. The Ashworths had built their lives on sand, and the tide had come in. Liam had built his on bedrock, and he was just getting started. The skyline was the proof. What we build in our lives says everything about who we are. Some people build walls of arrogance and exclusion, while others build bridges of innovation and community. Liam's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the ones with the most detailed blueprints for the future. They don't need to announce their value. They simply demonstrate it, day by day, action by action. So, what do you think is the most important foundation for a successful life? Is it wealth and status, or is it integrity and vision? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and vindication. Thank you for being here, and remember, never underestimate the silent architect. They might just be redesigning the world.